Hello and welcome to another episode of The Defenders on Sansad TV. And in this episode, we are going to look at a subject which has been in the news for more than 2 years. But more recently, there has been further agreement on disengagement between Chinese and Indian troops along the contested line of actual control in eastern Ladakh. And we have people who physically have been in those regions in various times of their life and career, and who will help us understand really what the disengagement is all about. We have Lieutenant General Pannu, who's commanded 14 Corps in Ladakh and has served with military operations, has had a distinguished military career, has now been involved with academic writing on the issues related with Sino-Indian relations and other bigger national security issues. So welcome on the show, General Pannu. And we have Ambassador and Professor Stobdan, who is the author of a very well-researched book on the issues related with the Himalayas and Sino-Indian ties, but is also local from the area of Ladakh and visits the region regularly, apart from being in Delhi and in the intellectual and seminar circuit. So I'll ask you, Professor Stobdan, sir, the first question. Is it now apparent that after the Chinese intrusions in Galwan in 2020, that this whole mirage that China had created of the peaceful rise of China is something that we should now set aside, because for one reason, their aggressive activity on the LAC, the other is their unwillingness to go back to earlier stated positions and engage with India on a term which had come to prevail over a period of time, that let's respect the status quo.
In the first place, I don't think this terminology of the rise of peaceful rise of China was an Indian invention. It was an invention of the West to push their market, to push their investment into China. There was a period when the West was praising about Chinese performances in the economic and manufacturing sectors. But today, you can see that there was never a peaceful rise of China, and China has been aggressive throughout history. And I have read the history of China for the last 3,000, 4,000 years of Chinese history. There was never a period of the peaceful rise. And I don't think, even before the Communist Party, they were violent, they were very aggressive. The expansion of Chinese empire took place before the Communist Party.
Yes.
So therefore, one cannot conclude the fact that China was peaceful and China is not going to be peaceful tomorrow. Chinese will always violate international norms and bilateral agreements, and it shows on the border, whether in the continental side or on the maritime side. Even I feel that even the frontiers with Russia is also tentative, though there have been some agreement in that sector, in the Ussuri and the Altai sector. But in the long run, I think the politics is going to change very rapidly in the coming years.
No, I cannot disagree with a word you've said, sir, because more so having read your book not once, many times over, and used it to enhance my own understanding of Sino-Indian ties. So clearly, there is now a greater reality check that has come to prevail after the Galwan incidents and the Chinese obstinacy even after that. General Pannu, you having commanded the 14 Corps in Ladakh and northern regions beyond up to Siachen Glacier, so you are quite clearly conversant with the ground reality. I want clarity now that these patrolling points that we are all getting very excited about, my understanding is that only we and our Indian troops have agreed to and abided by the disengagement requirements. The Chinese are still sticking to the ground they have occupied since 2020.
Agreements have happened over a period of time, and these patrolling points then emerged as the ones which both sides had acceptability that you could dominate to certain areas, and also there was acceptability where you would not patrol. But the claims were the ones which are making troops to push, and that is where the disagreement came up on the perceptions, and the troops, many times met, encounters happened on ground.
Quick, another question before I come to Ambassador Stobdan. Are we any nearer to an acceptable set of positions for what we had been pitching for, or only we are willing to move forward or backward to suit a big purpose of disengagement, whereas the Chinese are pretty obstinate? Since you've commanded 14 Corps, and the whole Depsang Plains is something that the Chinese don't even want to talk about because they say they're not part of the 2020 intrusions, but they are part of intrusions anyway.
I'll give you a short answer to this, that the areas which were patrolled earlier, the Chinese occupied them this time. And over a period of time, they have left those locations, and as a reaction to it, India also occupied, like south of Pagong So. But over a period of time, for the reasons of bringing in peace and tranquility, certain adjustments were made and the troops went back. And this time it was a new normal that while they fell back on the base, but the strength has been larger than what it was ever before. So therefore, the readiness to occupy is much better. The troops are better equipped, better aligned. But in certain areas, the Chinese have not gone back, right? PP-15, which was only a patrolling point, the Chinese came and occupied it. Similarly, Hot Spring, they came and occupied. They came and occupied Depsang, where we have Nala Junction. That is a bottleneck area. If the Chinese continue to sit there, we will not be able to patrol Depsang area where we have all the patrolling points, and we have not touched these patrolling points for the last 2 years.
I'll come back to you because there's an important issue there. Ambassador Stobdan, sir, you wanted to make a point, and after that I'll ask my question.
Yeah, since now they are talking about 1959 line, and violated 1993, 96, 2005 and BDCA 2013 agreements. I think there is no point talking about PPs now. PP is a self-imposed area denial for patrolling by ourselves. We restricted our nomads, we restricted our army also for our claim lines. I think after the map that we have brought out in 2020 November, or 2019 November, of the Union Territory of Ladakh, which covers, 2 years ago, security situation will never change. You have to manage it. But it's all about the political narrative. We haven't built a narrative that Aksai Chin, we are serious about Aksai Chin, except for one gentleman called John Lal, who was in the Ministry of Defense, was Joint Secretary. Nobody took Aksai Chin seriously. He was the only person who wrote a book about Aksai Chin. Today, if you ask somebody about Aksai Chin, no Indian knows anything about Aksai Chin. Well, British used to at least measure the temperature in Depsang Plateau. I don't know how many people today even talk about the flora and fauna and the deserts and the vegetation in Aksai Chin. Nobody knows. So I think it's all about building a future narrative. That has to be exercised in a very big way. Military can do their own job, but they have a limited protocol.
Right.
Beyond that, they cannot set the agenda.
Yeah, in fact, you've set me up for another question for you, which I'll come back. Now about protocols, Jan Pannu. As far as protocols are concerned, I know a little bit about it, you perhaps a lot more, that it is the China study group that sets our protocols or our terms of activity there, if not engagement. Firstly, what is the China study group? Secondly, how influential it is on the military operations since you have served in MO. How influential is the China study group in even insisting that the Ministry of External Affairs go with the stated line they are giving, or is the China study group is just another imposition on the military and its activities?
Politically, both countries had decided not to push the militaries around and largely not disturb the diplomatic and political relations. And therefore, a lot of things were set aside and put on back burner. As a result, the special representatives would engage with one another, and the China study group basically supported these special representatives to make them understand what a strategy should be. The China study group did whatever study on ground they can push and how much they cannot. At the end of it, the China study group, as Ambassador Stobdan is saying, only laid limits beyond which we should not go, not to disturb the Chinese beyond a point so that they should not react. So therefore, both a military situation at hand and all the protocols go towards it. In fact, there is a very important agreement on political parameters, but the articles are very disturbing. One of the article, which is Article 5, says that you should take practical difficulties, reasonable concerns and sensitivities in actual state of borders. Now, when you put all this and you in a democratic country, you take a sellout to the other country. So therefore, tall leaders have to come up and decide how much they can bargain or how much they can trade off relations. And that is where we ended.
Very interesting. You brought me to another question I have in mind for you, but first, Ambassador Stobdan. From April 2020 onwards, when the Chinese intruded, is there the possibility of greater friction?
I still believe that CBMs cannot be done by the military. CBM has to be top down. You know, it started in Wuhan in 2017, but it fizzled out. So, the kind of CBMs which the Chinese have built with other countries, I've studied their model. And in some cases it worked, some cases they haven't worked. One cannot really rely on the military dimension of the whole conflict. Somewhere the political class has to take some kind of a responsibility. It's not just ordering the army to manage the border. So that unfortunately has stopped. Now it's a chicken and egg kind of a situation. How do we start? The Chinese have made it very clear that April 2020 is not possible. So they're sticking to 1959 line. Beyond April 2000, there will still further ones to come inside. That's what the indication is.
Can I just butt in here? And, you know, we all know that the 59 proposal by Chou En-lai must have had Mao Zedong's blessings. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made such proposals of the 59 line. And thereafter, the proposal again came up post Nehru's demise. But my understanding is there was a reluctance even then in the Foreign Office in Delhi to go against the legacy of Pandit Nehru, where he had made various statements about the border, that map or no map, McMahon line is my boundary. And in here also our claims are very clear based on our maps of 54, 55. So all having been said, there was again a swap proposal that was brought up saying accept the 5960 line and we accept your holdings in Arunachal Pradesh. So two questions from this. One is the swap proposal a reality that can come into being at some stage? B, if not, what is it that we hope to achieve when we are not even being able to move the Chinese out from one PP or the other? The entire Aksai Chin is a very large swath of land. What is it that we can hope to achieve? What's your realistic take on it?
My own personal thinking about the whole situation is that the swap formula hasn't worked. And what General Pannu has just made, that even 2005 guiding the principles and parameters that populated areas should not be touched.
Yeah.
Now in Dapsang, no human being lives. So the 2000 formula goes in Chinese favor. So therefore there are a lot of complication now. The whole thing has become very complicated, including PPs and claim lines and the patrolling areas. It's not parallel from Dapsang to Chumur. It's not one thing. A lot of complication in between. My own personal sense is that what McDonnell has offered, let's divide Aksai Chin between North Aksai Chin and South Aksai Chin. Keep proper Aksai Chin with China and get the, Changchenmo and Lingzitang.
And parts of Pengong So, etc. with us.
That comes in the Indian side.
Yeah, that's what
but
I'm saying.
then you give up claim in the Kunlun areas, which Karakash and all that area. But Lingzitang and Changchenmo becomes Indian. So that could be a realistic. There is a Laksang, Laktang, which means a tiger nest. It's a range which divides Aksai Chin Plateau between north and the south. That was studied by the British surveyors, and the British office also approved that. But the Chinese never answered to that proposal of 1899, of which MacDonald offered.
In any case, whatever proposals were doing the rounds before 49, Mao and his regimes have dismissed them, saying, as part of a colonial legacy, we don't want to honor it.
Yes, exactly.
And yet, so, General Pannu, how do you think that we are going to be able to move forward in terms of dealing with China, particularly their obstinate stand, not so much PP-15 and all, they were minor things that really don't bother the Chinese to the extent that if they would have to vacate the Depsang Plains. And Depsang Plains, they don't want to talk about. Why? Secondly, what is it that China would be looking at achieving in the other parts with their friction-laden area? Because the criticism of all the arrangements that have come out is been that not much has come out in favor of India. But the counterpoint is that perhaps we are looking at a new line which is more agreeable and manageable, based on your earlier point, that we need to go on the ground and demarcate the line. Unless you do that, what is the basis on which you are fighting over?
Maroof, one has to see what is the strategic intent behind pushing troops and making lines and lines of acceptability. The Western Highway was created soon enough after the PRC came in and the Tibet was captured, or and we recognized, I think we were the first to recognize annexation of Tibet, or Tibet as part of China. We were also looking at our own claim lines based on our traditional claims, traditional boundaries of Ladakh, the Chushul Agreement, and such like historical evidences and facts. But the fact is that the Chinese built a Western Highway. Are they going to allow India to draw any line which either brings the Western Highway towards the Indian territory, or allow the Indians to come close to the Western Highway, so be able to threaten the Western Highway? I don't think so. You have to see their perception and their understanding of their sensitivities.
In fact, it has been argued that one of the reasons why they intruded in 2020 was to give a greater buffer to the Western Highway G219.
Yes. And also, when Western Highway has to be dominated, as you are saying, they are very sensitive to occupying the heights and dominating the passes through which Indian troops might get access to the Western Highway. So, as the infrastructure continued to be developed, the China Study Group is also one which deals with development of infrastructure and how the civilian settlements will come up, because the population is increasing from both sides. The Chinese have been very sensitive to looking at how our DSDBO road is coming up. They don't want the DSDBO road to remain completely sanitized and protected by the Indian army, and they want to come as close and threaten the DSDBO, so be able to cut off. And secondly, not allow the Indians to use the DSDBO to get into the Karakoram Pass and then go beyond and dominate areas on the northern side of the Kunlun and the Karakoram.
Yes.
So strategically, if you really see, we have come to a checkmate as far as military is concerned, because of the occupation of heights which are of military significance, the road, and therefore you draw any line, the Chinese are going to react to it very sharply. So I think both sides, if you have to sit down on a table, have to look at each other's sensitivities rather than only keep looking at the historical evidences.
But since 2020, the sensitivities are high in India, but all that these rounds of talks have achieved, which I believe is very little, but all that these rounds of talks have achieved is politely requesting the Chinese to go back. Apparently, in a lot of positions, our troops have withdrawn, but they haven't.
I think also there is notion of victory. China wants to look bigger, stronger. Given an opportunity, they would want to embarrass India, because India is showing up as a global and a regional power. And they don't want to be seen that the Indian troops are pushing them around. And I suppose that is the image that the Chinese want to create. If they are seen to be pushed around here, well, they can be pushed around by anybody else. So therefore, if India, having a very strong military, if they can do whatever military action to say that, listen, we are better off than the Indians are, and we have, in a way, defeated the designs of the Indian military, I think it goes in a very big way to demonstrate their military and larger strength, which in the global arena they want to prove. In fact, they want to threaten America. How would they look at India pushing them around on the borders? I suppose, we have to see that in a very different context, whereas the military and the diplomatic issues are separate, but they have larger issues of image, not only of the country, but also of the leadership.
So quite clearly, from what we have understood, that some of the movement and withdrawal and the announcements on the PPs are more symbolic than really strategic. And the other aspect is that we are looking at still Sino-Indian friction along the LAC, and overall strategically, whatever the reasons might be given on the contrary. I need to wrap up, and the point which I have understood is that we need to have the boundary demarcated before we continue to insist on our claim line versus their claim line. Is that correct?
No.
Then?
I think there's a bigger question.
No, the bigger question, of course, but to start with, address the smaller question.
Yes, to manage your situation, that's the only solution.
Okay. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much to both of you for your very detailed, insightful remarks. Until our next episode, goodbye.